At 9:42 a.m. on June 19, 1944, the island of Saipan recorded a number that should make anyone pause. C Company lost 6 tanks and 14 men in under 12 hours. Why? How could armored giants vanish so quickly on ground barely 200 yards wide? And what force pushed a 2-year-old tank commander to abandon not 1 but 2 burning Shermans before noon? The answers begin in a world of black and white haze, smoke dragging across volcanic dust, steel groaning under heat that climbed past 100 degrees inside an armored turret. The war in the Pacific was swallowing machines whole. Mines, concealed guns, and the terrain itself were becoming silent hunters. And Major Robert Neeman, commander of C Company, 4th Tank Battalion, found himself at the center of it. He crouched inside his M4 Sherman as it crawled forward, gears straining, the engine fed by belief more than fuel. Ahead lay a rise shielded by concrete bunkers housing at least 12 75mm guns, all sighted onto the exact strip of open ground his company was crossing. Mortars stitched the sky. Machine gun fire scraped the hull like metal rain. Every second was a question. Which tank would be hit next? Which crew wouldn't make it out? They had moved 70 yards when the first answer arrived. A thunderous impact hurled Neeman sideways into the turret wall. The world dimmed. Smoke filled the engine compartment, thick and suffocating. His crew bailed instantly, no time for hesitation, and scrambled across the open killing field as rounds sparked off the hull like someone striking flint against stone. Most officers would have taken cover, but Neeman was wired differently. He sprinted through the swirling ash toward the next Sherman and hauled himself in through the commander's hatch. His ribs burned, his hearing rang. But the tank lurched forward again, dragging dust behind it like a wounded animal determined to move. 30 yards later, fate struck again. A sudden roar beneath the left track, a blast. The Sherman's treads blew apart, 70-pound links scattering across the ground. The vehicle pivoted uncontrollably, slamming Neeman into the gun breech hard enough to crack ribs and steal his breath. They were stuck, exposed, motionless. Another decision, another sprint under fire. Neeman bolted toward a 3rd Sherman idling 20 yards back, each step cutting into volcanic ash that swallowed boots like quicksand. Mortar bursts stitched the landscape, shards tore through the air. Yet he climbed in, slammed the hatch, and once again ordered the driver forward. This time, the momentum held. The tank ground its way through the curtain of fire. The gunner struck 2 bunkers, then a mortar pit. The line finally cracked open. Through grit, instinct, and 3 consecutive tanks, Major Neeman carved a path where none should have existed. But victory came with a price. Nearly 1/3 of the division's armor lost in a single week. Saipan revealed a truth more dangerous than artillery. The ground itself had become the enemy. Mines were everywhere, hidden under ash, waiting, learning, reshaping the battlefield. And in that harsh realization, something else ignited inside Neeman. A question that would reshape his future and the future of armored warfare in the Pacific. If the Earth could be turned against them, could a machine be built to turn it back? War leaves numbers behind that never stop echoing. By late 1944, the Pacific had already consumed over 100,000 American casualties across its island campaigns. Entire battalions were erased by terrain, mines, heat, exhaustion, and ambushes so sudden they left no time for last words. The Pacific wasn't just a battlefield, it was a grinder. It crushed steel as easily as it crushed men. Saipan alone had shown the cost with terrifying clarity. 68 Marine Shermans landed, and 23 were lost in a week, nearly 1/3. Many weren't taken out by enemy gunners, but by hidden charges buried beneath ash, waiting in silence. Mines didn't argue. They didn't miss. They simply waited. Major Robert Neeman carried those numbers with him when the 4th Marine Division returned to Maui. It was supposed to be a period of rest and refit, but statistics like that don't allow rest, they demand solutions. The motor pool stretched across the valley floor, a patchwork of machinery, scorched hulls, and men who looked older than their years. Maui was paradise on the outside, but inside the repair tents, paradise didn't exist. Engines roared, welding torches spat sparks, ground crews hauled steel plates and transmissions like blacksmiths, forging weapons for a new century. Neeman walked through this organized chaos with a notebook tucked under his arm. He moved slowly, studying, absorbing, replaying Saipan in his mind. The tracks blown apart, the cratered lanes, the Marines dragging wounded tankers through volcanic dust. Mines weren't an inconvenience, they were a strategy, one that was working. If the next island was worse, and intelligence suggested it would be, 4th Tank Battalion couldn't afford another week like Saipan. That's when Neeman stopped walking. At the far edge of the yard sat Joker, a battered M4A2 dozer tank. Its dozer blade had been twisted by shell impacts on Saipan. The hull was scorched. Its diesel engine, obsolete by late 1944 Marine standards, was days away from being stripped and scrapped for parts. Mechanics walked past it without a second glance. But Neeman didn't. Something caught his eye, not the damage, but the shape, the pushed forward front end, the mounting brackets where the dozer hydraulics had once been. A thought flickered, then it formed, then it took hold. Could a tank hit the ground first before the mines ever touched its tracks? Could an armored machine swing chains, rods, something, anything hard enough to detonate buried charges at a safe distance? British units had solved this in North Africa years earlier, using mine-flails, scorpions and crabs, but none had been sent to the Pacific. The Marines were always fighting with whatever hand-me-downs they could salvage. Europe got the sophisticated equipment, the Pacific got the leftovers, but leftovers were sometimes all you needed. The idea hit him with the force of a 75mm recoil. Turn Joker into a flail, build it from scrap, beat the ground before the ground could beat them. The next morning, inside a canvas briefing tent warmed by Maui sun, Neeman laid out his rough sketch. 12 lines, 1 rotating drum, a ring of chains, a drive shaft connecting to the hull. A crude, beautiful, reckless concept. His officers studied the drawing in silence. Some raised eyebrows, others frowned. Lieutenant Bob Reed, his exec, stated the obvious. How do we power the rotation? A tank engine doesn't run external machinery. Neeman didn't flinch. We'll figure it out as we go. Then came the moment that changed everything. Gunnery Sergeant Sam Johnston stepped forward. Johnston had a reputation earned the hard way, from Guadalcanal's mud, from New Georgia's storms, from Saipan's molten ground. If a tank could be kept moving, he could keep it moving. If something didn't exist, he could build it. I can make it work, he said. 8 words, spoken with absolute certainty. But I'll need Staff Sergeant Shaw and full access to the junk pile. Neeman didn't hesitate. Take it. For the next 72 hours, Johnston and Shaw wandered the salvage yard like treasure hunters. They overturned wrecked trucks, stripped abandoned jeeps, and crawled under half-melted tank hulls. The other Marines joked that the pair looked like miners, searching for gold in a field of ruin. On the 3rd day, they found it. A destroyed 2.5-ton truck with a rear axle and differential still intact 6 feet long, built like a steel spine, perfect for spinning chains at high speed. They hauled it back with a crane, dragging dust like a procession carrying a relic. Pieces began to fall into place. A frame welded to Joker's nose. Chains measured, cut, hung from the rotating drum. A Jeep transmission repurposed, jury-rigged, bolted to the hull. A hole cut straight through the Sherman's frontal armor, something no manual had ever permitted. It was reckless. It was brilliant. It was Marine Corps ingenuity in its rawest form. As sparks flew inside the motor pool and steel rang like a hammer on an anvil, something larger took shape. Not just a machine, but a promise. No Marine should walk blind into buried danger again. And yet, even as this mechanical creature neared completion, a question loomed, one that would define the next chapter. Would this improvised monster survive its first meeting with the real thing? Because the only way to prove it worked was to run it straight into a field of live mines. War is a ledger, and by late 1944 its Pacific column was terrifying. Tarawa, over 3,000 American casualties in 76 hours. Peleliu, 10,000 inches, 2 months. Saipan, more than 14,000 inches. 3 brutal weeks. The math was merciless. Every island was costing more lives, more steel, more time. And intelligence said the next target, an 8-square-mile rock called Iwo Jima, would be the hardest yet. Against numbers like that, a machine built from scrap metal seemed like a whisper in a hurricane. But sometimes history turns not on the size of an army, but on the courage behind an idea. By early December, Joker, the improvised flail tank, sat in the motor pool like something forged in a blacksmith's nightmare. A Sherman with a 6-foot truck axle bolted to its nose, chains hanging like iron fangs. A Jeep transmission jury-rigged to spin the assembly. Welds covered the frame like scar tissue. Sunlight caught on the crude armor plates wrapped around the differential housing. It looked wrong, unnatural, and exactly what the moment demanded. Major Robert Neeman stood beside it, arms folded, as the battalion gathered at the edge of the test field. Perhaps 100 Marines, tankers, engineers, infantrymen on break formed a wide ring around an empty patch of ground half a mile away. They had heard rumors, they had seen sparks and smoke from the motor pool for weeks. Now they wanted to witness the madness for themselves. Because today wouldn't be a simulation. Today would be live. Marine engineers had buried Type 93 Japanese anti-tank charges across a 40-yard lane. Ceramic-cased, pressure-triggered, each holding 22 pounds of explosive force, enough to tear a tank's track off, enough to turn a steel hull into a coffin. They buried some shallow, some deep, some in clusters. They wanted this test to mirror the chaos waiting on the next island. The air felt heavier than Maui's warm winter morning should allow. Inside Joker, Gunnery Sergeant Sam Johnston wiped his palms, adjusted his headset, and settled into the bow gunner's station, the seat now wired to control the entire flail. Behind him, a veteran driver tightened his gloves and waited for the order. Neeman raised his hand. Begin. The Sherman's engine growled awake, fed by belief and diesel. Johnston pushed the engagement lever. The Jeep transmission snarled. The drive shaft shuddered. Slowly, reluctantly, like a beast remembering how to move, the truck axle began to turn. Chains lifted off the ground, then rose higher, then blurred into a spinning halo of steel. The sound was unlike anything the Marines had ever heard, a metallic cyclone, a deep rolling thunder that vibrated in the soil. Mechanics stopped working. Officers instinctively stepped back. The tank, now half machine, half ancient weapon, crept forward at walking speed. 5 yards. 10. The chains battered the earth, dragging dust, chewing furrows into the volcanic soil. Then the first charge detonated. A tower of dirt, ash, and shattered ceramic erupted 30 feet high. The blast wave slapped the crowd. Marines ducked. One man cursed under his breath. When the dust cleared, the impossible stood revealed. Joker was still moving. The flail still spun, roaring, forcing the ground to reveal its teeth. Then another detonation, then another. The explosions came faster now, rippling like drumbeats, each blast triggered by a chain striking hidden danger before it could touch the hull. The Sherman vanished into smoke and flying ash. All that remained visible was the blurred wheel of iron slashing the earth. 30 yards, 35, 40. Then the tank emerged from the far side of the field, coated in dust, dented, scorched but intact. Silence followed, a stunned, reverent silence. Marines began jogging toward the machine. Some laughed in disbelief, some shook their heads, others touched the flail frame as though reaching for a relic. The chains were dented but still hanging. The axle still spun freely when Johnston tested it. But then someone shouted, "Sir, down here, look at this." A jagged metal fragment had punched through the underside of the differential armor. It hadn't destroyed the mechanism, but it had come close. Too close. If this had happened on Iwo Jima, Joker would have died in seconds. Johnston knelt beside it, jaw tight. Shaw stood next to him, eyes already calculating. No one waited for orders. The Seabees dragged steel plates out of storage. Torches hissed. Sparks flew. They boxed the entire differential housing inside a 1/4-inch armored shell, so tight it looked carved from a single block. The welds were rough, ugly, perfect. 4 days later, they tested again. Another minefield, another storm of detonations. This time, the armor held every fragment, bouncing off with dull, harmless thuds. Now, Joker wasn't just a wild idea. It was a weapon, a new kind of blade for a new kind of battlefield. And word spread. By late December, high-ranking officers requested a formal demonstration. Colonels, lieutenant colonels, even a major general. They wanted proof that a tank built from junk could rewrite Pacific tactics. They would get their proof, but not before one final twist, one that would push the project from invention into legend. Because, on the morning of December 28th, as chairs were set, as officers gathered, as history waited, the man who built the machine was nowhere to be found. War in the Pacific was accelerating toward its darkest peak. By the end of 1944, U.S. intelligence estimates painted a grim horizon. Iwo Jima could cost more than 20,000 American casualties. The island's defenders, 21,000 Japanese troops under Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, had vanished underground, constructing more than 11 miles of reinforced tunnels, chambered firing ports, and cross-linked strongpoints. Every beach, every rise, every exposed strip of volcanic ash had been pre-registered for devastating fire. If Saipan was a warning, Iwo Jima was a promise, one written in numbers that no commander could ignore. That is why, on the morning of December 28th, 1944, the High Command of the 4th Marine Division gathered on a quiet stretch of Maui. Sunlight spilled over rows of folding chairs. Officers, colonels, lieutenant colonels, artillery coordinators, logistics planners took their seats. A major general stood at the center, hands folded behind his back, every eye focused on the machine waiting at the far end of the field. Joker, the improvised flail tank. The chains hanging from its 6-foot axle glinted like the talons of some steel predator. Its welded armor looked raw, unrefined yet purposeful, like a tool built in the dark for a job no one else dared perform. But 15 minutes before the demonstration, the entire project nearly collapsed. Gunnery Sergeant Sam Johnston, master mechanic, builder of the flail, and the only man who could operate it with total confidence, was missing. Marines found him slumped on his cot, barely conscious, drained by weeks of back-breaking work and one ill-timed night of heavy drinking. His eyes wouldn't stay open. His voice barely rose above a whisper. Neeman's stomach tightened. Hundreds of man-hours, weeks of welding, grinding, cutting, testing. A machine built from scrap and desperation. And now, no operator. The general was already approaching the chairs. The clock refused to slow. Neeman moved. He scanned the yard, searching for a driver with steady hands and steady nerves. He found one, a young corporal from A Company, known for running Shermans smoothly over rough terrain. The kind of Marine who listened twice before acting once. Neeman grabbed him by the shoulder. "You're driving the flail today." The corporal blinked. "Sir, I've never—" "You've got 10 minutes. You'll be fine." Inside the tank, Neeman rattled through the controls: engage lever, speed linkage, hydraulic lift, emergency release. The corporal nodded, absorbing the information with the sharp focus of a man who knew failure wasn't an option. At exactly 0800, Neeman stepped before the officers and began his briefing. His voice carried the rhythm of battlefield truth, hard, clipped, unembellished. He spoke of Saipan's 23 destroyed tanks, of engineers crawling forward at 10 yards an hour, of infantry pinned by pressure plates buried under volcanic ash. He cited Peleliu's 10,000 casualties, Tarawa's 3,000 dead and wounded in 76 hours, and the brutal arithmetic that predicted Iwo Jima would be worse than them all combined. Then he pointed at Joker. "This machine," he said, "is built to change those numbers." Silence followed, heavy, expectant. Neeman stepped back. The test began. The corporal engaged the starter. The Sherman's diesel coughed awake. Chains rattled. Metal vibrated. Then the flail mechanism roared to life, spinning, growing faster, clawing air as though the tank had grown a second engine. Dust lifted around the machine. Marines watching from the sidelines instinctively stepped back as the whirling ring of chains blurred into a single spinning halo. The tank lurched forward, dragging dust, blades of steel cutting deep scars into the ground. 5 yards, 10. The machine moved steadily toward the buried charges. Then, a violent eruption cracked the field open. A column of dirt shot 20 feet into the air. The blast rattled the officers' chairs. The corporal tightened his grip, steadying the tank. But the flail kept spinning. The tank kept advancing. Another explosion, then another. A chain of detonations rolled across the field like thunder chasing itself. The crowd watched as Joker disappeared entirely inside a cloud of ash and flying rock. The sound hit them like a drumline, sequential, brutal, relentless. 30 yards, 35, 40. And then, like a creature emerging from smoke, the tank burst through the far edge of the field, scarred, dust-covered, but alive. The corporal killed the flail. The chains slowed, then hung silently. The battlefield fell quiet. Officers stood. Some walked forward, inspecting the armor, tapping the welded plates, studying the mechanism like archaeologists examining a relic from the future. One colonel muttered, "If this works on Iwo Jima, it changes everything." The Major General turned to Neeman. "How many can you build by February?" Neeman hesitated. "Right now, sir, just one." The general didn't blink. "Then one will go." It was official. Joker would join the assault on Iwo Jima. But no one yet understood that the island waiting ahead was unlike any battlefield in Marine Corps history. The volcanic ash would swallow tanks whole. The tunnels would turn the island into a fortress, and the flail machine that roared across Maui would soon meet the black sands where thousands of Marines would fall. War moves forward whether men are ready or not. By January 1945, the Pacific Campaign, already soaked in staggering cost, was narrowing toward a single, brutal objective. Iwo Jima, an 8-square-mile anvil of volcanic rock, positioned halfway between the Marianas and mainland Japan. It was small on a map, but enormous in consequence. American planners believed that capturing Iwo Jima would save thousands of bomber crews whose crippled aircraft needed a place to land. But the price? Intelligence predicted 20,000 dead and wounded. A number so high it felt like a misprint until commanders reviewed the photos of tunnel entrances, camouflaged gun ports, and the black ash that swallowed boots like quicksand. Into that rising tide rolled the 4th Tank Battalion, 68 Sherman strong, each fed by belief, each dragging the lessons of Saipan behind them. Among them was Joker, the improvised flail tank, whose demonstration on Maui had stunned generals and carved its place in the order of battle. The irony was hard to ignore. An island that had taken 3 weeks to fortify had nearly destroyed C Company. Iwo Jima had been fortified for nearly a year. Kuribayashi's men had turned the entire island into a layered machine of resistance, 11 miles of tunnels, pillboxes stacked like vertebrae, every open area mapped for artillery fire. Still, Joker boarded its LST for the voyage west. Neeman walked the deck in the evenings, replaying the demonstration, the detonations ripping the earth open, the officers leaning forward in disbelief. It was proof that Marines could innovate faster than the battlefield could punish them. Proof that machines could be bent to human will. Proof that even in the black and white brutality of the Pacific, ingenuity still mattered. 3 weeks later, the fleet arrived offshore. February 19th, 1945, D-Day, Iwo Jima. At 0640, battleships and cruisers opened fire. For 3 days, they had hammered the island with the heaviest bombardment yet seen in the Pacific. Nearly 6,800 tons of shells had been fired, yet Kuribayashi's troops waited underground, untouched, listening to the earth shake above them. At 0900, the first Marines stepped onto the beach and felt the truth instantly. The island was not sand. It was volcanic ash, deep, loose, treacherous. Every step sank, every vehicle bogged, tracks spun uselessly. Men hauling equipment moved as if dragging chains. By 10:15, Joker came ashore with C Company, hauling blades of steel and anticipation. Sergeant Rick Haydex commanded it now, calm, focused, carrying the invisible weight of the machine's reputation. He had trained with Johnston on Maui. He knew the mechanism's rhythm, the hum that signaled stable rotation, the tremor that warned of trouble. But the ash, nothing could prepare them for this. As Joker tried to climb from the surf line, the bow dug in. The added weight of the flail frame, so effective in stabilizing the tank during tests, now pressed the front end deeper into the black soil. The driver throttled up, dragging dust behind the treads. The engine roared, fed by belief and desperation, but the ground simply swallowed more. Still, Joker pushed inland slowly, painfully toward airfield No. 1. That airstrip was the prize of the morning, but intelligence had warned mines would be thick near the strip. Engineers moved ahead with metal detectors, sweeping inch by inch. It was agonizingly slow. Haydex scanned the horizon. That was when he saw the line of red flags. In Saipan, in Tinian, in maps from Army intelligence, flags like this had meant one thing: obstacles, buried charges, impassable danger. He radioed his platoon leader, requesting permission to engage flail. Permission came back instantly. "Clear us a lane." Haydex ordered the bow gunner to start the mechanism. The chains spun up slow at first, then blurring into a whirlwind of iron. The ash lifted in spirals around the tank. Marines nearby backed away from the vortex of dust. Joker advanced. But those weren't mine markers. They were mortar range markers, placed by Japanese observers to guide fire onto the Marines' advance routes. The first round dropped short 20 yards. The second came closer. The third struck so near that debris slapped the hull and cracked the driver's periscope. Mortars began falling in a deadly rhythm, pre-plotted, pre-registered, invisible but exact. Haydex ordered reverse. The track spun helplessly. The ash gripped the tank like a claw. The flail still spun. The engine still roared. But Joker wasn't moving. A stationary tank is a target. A stationary experimental tank is a miracle waiting to end. Fragments rang against the armor like hail against a church bell, sharp, relentless, cold. Inside, the crew breathed quick, shallow breaths. The cabin filled with the chalky smell of disturbed volcanic ash. Haydex shut down the flail, praying that reducing weight on the bow might help. Nothing changed. Then came salvation. Another Sherman from C Company roared up through the smoke, dragging a tow cable like a lifeline thrown across the void. Under continuous fire, its crew attached the cable, hauling Joker backward, foot by foot, through the black ash until the machine found stable ground again. Joker lived, but the island had spoken clearly. The volcanic terrain that swallowed boots and crushed momentum had no tolerance for a heavy front-mounted flail. Engineers with handheld detectors inching forward under fire would still bear the burden. Innovation had hit a natural limit. And yet even in that failure, Joker left a spark, because its principle would not die on Iwo Jima's black sand. It would rise again in the post-war decades, shaping modern mine-clearing vehicles from Korea to Afghanistan. And the spirit that built it, the belief that human ingenuity can counter even the darkest tools of war, remains a thread woven through every battlefield innovation since. In the end, Joker was not a miracle machine, but it was a message, a reminder that courage isn't always about charging forward. Sometimes it's about imagining something no one else sees, and dragging that idea out of the scrap heap, hammering it into steel, and giving it a chance to change the world. That was the legacy Major Neeman carried home. Not the machine itself, but the spark it proved could survive even the black sands of Iwo Jima.